For a brief time, I was not religious. I didn't have any sort of like spiritual practices. And then right around the time that the History Channel came out with Vikings, that TV show, that first season,
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, that looks cool, Vikings. And I saw, some things going on in the show that was a representation of the spirituality of Northern European or Scandinavian people during the Viking Age, which interestingly enough was the time of history where Scandinavia began to become Christian themselves.
Yeah.
So their pagan beliefs were being eradicated and outlawed in some places.
That's
So
a fascinating historical story. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and so I was like, well, I want to learn more about this, and come to find out, as with many things on TV and in Hollywood, things get embellished or things get romanticized, and I started to learn like, well, this is not the most accurate representation of how these people lived at the time. It was focusing on the saga-esque aspects of things, the stories of the heroes and whatnot, which is all really fascinating too. But I wanted to learn more about what the average Joe at the time was doing. How
Yeah.
did people in that area, in that region, what did they believe in? So you have to go back even further than the Viking Age and earlier than that to know what these people believed in. And so that's kind of where it all started. It started with Vikings on TV.
Yeah.
That was kind of the seed that was planted. But from there, I applied it and actually found like I was at home. I felt like I was doing things that somehow connected to me or were connected to me through a long line of ancestors,
Yeah.
So
Very cool.
of course, yeah, that's kind of how things started for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of, I mean, in the most literal, practical, like step-by-step explanation of things, first you become aware that alternatives exist. Like, oh, this isn't the only way to see the world. And then you start looking at, well, what seems right for me? So I've got I have a very similar origin story. I think a lot of people do in America specifically. So I grew up in a house where, we never really went to church, but we were kind of like Christian by default. If you ask my parents if they believe in God, yes. They read the Bible every day. No, we weren't that kind of pray before a meal family, but it was kind of I don't know, not unexpected and not really a shock, I suppose. I've always been a bit of a contrarian. When I was young, I was like, I think I'm an atheist. And my parents were like, oh, really? Well, okay. Tell me how that works out for you. I would argue with them. They always didn't want to argue with me. I always wanted to argue more than they did. Sorry, Mom. But yeah, this is my way of exploring the world in some ways. Is like, I have these ideas. So challenge me, make me think about it, and let's go. But long story short, I never actually settled into a belief system. I kind of went from more atheist to agnostic, which I consider myself an agnostic atheist. It's a whole thing. But I went from rejecting it as these are methods of control as to more, these are frameworks through which to view the world and understand humans and nature and everything. And, all of these other stories, this mythology, as people call it, it carries important truths. And, on your podcast, I was talking about, that I have an equal respect for Greek mythology, Norse mythology, as I say, not disrespectfully, and Christian mythology. That took longer to come around to say, the Bible, they call it basic instructions before leaving Earth.
Leaving Earth?
Right,
Yeah.
B-I-B-L-E, right? Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah.
I just heard that again the other day. I'm like, I got to remember that. That's clever.
Forgot about that.
And fair enough. Well, and I kind of think of it as one version of a best practice guide to being human. Here's the problems you're going to face. Here's our understanding of what it is. Here's the solutions we've come up with. And if you look at each different religion, that's kind of what it is. It's like, here's how to understand yourself and the world around you. So if kind of later in life, heading towards the wizard phase, I wasn't always ready to do this, but I've come to have a deeper respect for those kind of things. Like, maybe there's things I should understand more.